number 13 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights as we endeavor to study Bill C-6. So just some housekeeping rules. Ensure that when you're speaking, please speak slowly and clearly so that interpretation is not impacted. When you're not speaking, please keep your microphone on mute. You have the ability to select the interpretation language at the bottom of your screen so that you can understand everybody. We're quite lucky today to have two ministers to talk to Bill C-6. I'd like to welcome the Honourable David Lametti, the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada. I'd also like to welcome the Honourable Bardish Chagger, who is the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth. We are also joined by some witnesses from the Department of Justice, Francois Daigle, who's the Associate Deputy Minister, and Robert Brookfield, the Deputy Assistant Deputy Minister. And then we also have representatives from the Department of Canadian Heritage, which is Fernand Comio, who's the Executive Director of the LGBTQ2 Secretariat. Ministers, you'll have 5 minutes each to make your opening remarks, and then we'll go into our 2 rounds of questions. We'll start with Minister Chagger for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Minister.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from Waterloo, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral people. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you to discuss Bill C-6, alongside my colleague, the Honourable David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Conversion therapy practices are based on the misguided idea that a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression can and should be changed to fit a narrow-minded view of what is normal. Cette idée n'est pas
This idea is not only wrong, but harmful, and this kind of practice has no place in our society. The Government of Canada must always stand up for those who are being attacked or persecuted simply for being who they are, and for those who are being prevented from living their lives fully, free from discrimination and violence. It is our duty to protect the rights and freedoms of all Canadians and to build a country where everyone feels safe, welcome, and included.
Increasing diversity and inclusion in Canada are fundamental parts of my mandate as Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth. I am fully committed to these objectives and to supporting LGBTQ2 communities from coast to coast to coast. The changes to the criminal code proposed in Bill C-6 support and protect LGBTQ2 individuals by criminalizing coercive and systematic efforts to change a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression into something or someone they are not. There have been some comments about what this bill would or wouldn't do. I want to be absolutely clear. This bill does not criminalize a person's faith or individual values. This bill does not criminalize exploratory conversations with your kids, students, mentees. This bill targets forced and coordinated efforts to change someone into something or someone they are not. Bill C-6 also allows us to protect equality rights, including religion and LGBTQ2 rights. This bill does not impose a hierarchy of rights. Over the past year, I've participated in a number of roundtable discussions with stakeholders about LGBTQ2 issues. These once in-person conversations have become virtual. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the world. All Canadians have been affected, and disproportionately certain segments. LGBTQ2 communities are no exception. Through these discussions, I've heard clearly the toll imposed by conversion therapy. It crushes my soul at the thought of having another generation endure conversion therapy. It is essential we acknowledge the people whose lives have been lost, as well as survivors. I cannot help but also think of the lives still currently being destroyed. We all have a role to play in building an even better, a safer and consciously more inclusive Canada for everyone. We can all work to build a better future where children who arrive in this world innocent and free and happy are not taught bigotry or to be ashamed of who they are. Imagine a Canada where every Canadian can lead an authentic life and be true to oneself. Imagine the contributions they could make. Vendredi dernier, j'ai eu le
Last Friday, I had the pleasure of announcing that we had launched the first step of the federal LGBTQ2 action plan. This plan will guide our government's work to improve social, health, and economic outcomes. The survey is open right now, and we want to improve the outcomes of diverse LGBTQ2 communities throughout Canada.
says that in Canada, diversity is one of our greatest strengths. The unique and diverse forms of gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation are part of that diversity. I would like to underscore why it is important we are all coming together constructively today. I want us to be conscious of the human aspect, the individual toll that is at stake here. This is a reality that many have lived and continue to live in Canada. It is our job as parliamentarians to protect Canadians from this harmful, this destructive practice. Bill C6 is another step to true inclusion in Canada. Ridding Canada of conversion therapy is a campaign commitment, but I can personally attest to this being a consistent ask in all roundtables I've held with LGBTQ2 communities. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing Minister Lameti's comments and then answering your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And so we'll now move on to Minister Lameti for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. I'm in Ottawa, and so I am participating from the traditional territory of the Algonquins. I'm pleased to speak to you today about the criminal law reforms proposed by Bill C6, an act to amend the criminal code on conversion therapy. The near unanimous support for sending Bill C6 to this committee reflects the critical importance of this bill. I would like to begin by thanking those who courageously shared their own experiences of discrimination. It is through the lived experience of LGBTQ2 people that we better understand why Bill C6 is so essential to the protection of their dignity and their equality. In particular, Bill C6 and the 5 new criminal offenses it proposes target a discriminatory practice against LGBTQ2 people, arguing that they can and must change a fundamental part of their identity, their sexual orientation or gender identity. This practice is rooted in the mistaken and discriminatory idea that non-heterosexual orientations and identities are pathologies or illnesses that can be corrected. So to speak, in short, its origin betrays the discriminatory views which the practice is based on, views that are completely at odds with modern science. It is not surprising that conversion therapy is known to be ineffective and to harm those subjected to it.
Focus on the bill's definition of conversion therapy because there appears to be some persisting confusion about its scope. Bill C6 defines conversion therapy as a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual or gender identity to cisgender, or to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior. The definition, therefore, has 2 elements. First, that the conduct at issue amounts to a practice, treatment, or service, and second, that the practice, treatment, or service is designed to achieve one of the prohibited objectives. The terms treatment, service, and practice are used in the Criminal Code and various other federal and provincial statutes, including in provincial conversion therapy-related statutes definitions of conversion therapy. For example, PEI's legislation refers specifically to a practice, treatment, or service. Notably, in none of these contexts are these terms defined, largely because the terms have a clear literal meaning. In Bill C6's conversion therapy definition, the term treatment means a therapy or procedure used to treat a medical condition, according to Merriam-Webster. That is how the term is also used and understood in the Criminal Code's mental disorder provisions, for example, section 672.59 of the Criminal Code. The term service in this context means labor that does not produce a tangible commodity, again, Merriam-Webster. The term is also used in this way in the human trafficking provisions, whereby traffickers extract a labor or service from their victims, section 279.04 of the Criminal Code. The term is also found in the Cannabis Act to refer to using the services of youth in the commission of cannabis-related offenses or to services related to cannabis in the context of commercial activity. The term practice means repeated or customary action, again, Merriam-Webster. The term is also used in this way in the Criminal Code's illegal betting provisions, section 203, and the animal cruelty provisions, section 445.2. All of these terms imply an established or formalized intervention, one that is generally offered to the public or a segment of the public. A mere conversation cannot, therefore, be considered a practice, service, or treatment unless it forms part of a formalized intervention, such as a talk therapy session. La deuxième partie de la définition.
The second part of the definition further reduces its scope. Practices, services, or treatments must be specifically designed to achieve clearly defined objectives. This is why the definition uses the terms heterosexual, cisgender, and non-heterosexual. Specifically, to fall within the definition, the intervention must be designed to make a person heterosexual or cisgender, or to suppress or reduce any non-heterosexual sexual attraction or behavior.
Cela signifie que les pratiques.
This means that the practices, services, or treatments that have other aims, such as sexual addiction or other problematic behaviors, sexual aggression, and so on, are not covered by the defenses, and that legitimate medical interventions are not targeted either. So, vigilant observation of young people regarding their sexual practices and leanings.
My apologies, we're out of time, but I'm sure that a lot of these issues will come out during.
Point of order.
Okay.
A lot of these issues will come out during question and answer. Yes, Mr. Cooper.
Point of order. It's just been brought to my attention, but the English phone line is almost inaudible. So could IT, through you, clerk, just look into that, and perhaps we could suspend to make sure that the phone line for our staff is working appropriately?
Absolutely. I'm not sure about the suspension, just given that we're in a pretty intense time crunch. I'm sure IT will work their best. And just on that note, we are celebrating 20 years of clerkship for Mr. Clerk. Thank you very much for everything that you've done over these 20 years and your growth.
Thank you so much. It goes directly to my heart.
Thank you. So we are looking into the IT issues right now, Mr. Cooper. We'll go into our first round.
Point of order, Madam Chair, and a technical issue again.
Madam Finlay.
As we found before, when you start talking, we can't hear you unless we switch from, which Mr. Virani pointed out, and I thank him for it, unless we switch from a language back to putting it off, like the floor. So if you just give a beat before you start to allow us to move over to where we can hear you. Otherwise, it takes several seconds before we can hear. Okay, thanks.
For that reminder, Madam Finlay, I will definitely wait a beat before I start speaking. We will go into our first round of questions. For 6 minutes, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister Lametti and Minister Shager, for being here and for your presentations regarding Bill C6. We have heard from some stakeholders who are concerned that good faith conversations to help individuals navigate their sexuality will be captured by this bill. Whether intentional or not, there is significant concern that this bill will capture those good faith conversations. When this bill was first introduced, language on the Justice Department's website stated that it would not affect conversations, quote, in which personal views on sexual orientation, sexual feelings, or gender identity are expressed, such as where teachers, school counselors, pastoral counselors, faith leaders, doctors, mental health professionals, friends or family members provide support to persons struggling with their sexual orientation, sexual feelings, or gender identity, end of quote. Now, there is a consensus in Canadian society that trying to forcibly change a person's sexual orientation or gender should be banned. Can I first ask the Justice Department officials if it would be problematic to simply include the language that was on the Justice Department's website or similar such language in the bill for greater certainty?
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for that question. I'll take the liberty of responding. As I have gone through, mainly in French in my prepared remarks, we feel that, in fact, the definition already encapsulates what you are trying in good faith to advance. As I've mentioned within the definition, the fact that the definition has two elements to it. First of all, that it must amount to a practice, treatment, or service. And secondly, that the practice, treatment, or service has to achieve a prohibitive objective. It does, in fact, encapsulate what that Justice Department website said and what we still continue to say, which it doesn't capture good faith conversations about people exploring their identity. There is a for greater certainty provision in the Act, and we actually don't even feel that is necessary in legal terms, but we feel that it captures quite well what you're trying to put forth.
Well, thank you, Minister. Now, speaking of some of the stakeholder organizations, CIJA, for example, just submitted a brief today in which they expressed support for the objective of the bill. Indeed, the individual who wrote that brief is a former member of Parliament, Richard Marceau, who has a long-standing track record of supporting LGBTQ rights. But in that CIJA brief, there was still a concern that the language in the current bill leaves ambiguity. So I know that during second reading debate, you did indicate that you would be prepared to work with opposition members to try to reach a consensus to the degree that is possible to get it right. Would you at the very least be open to amendments to the bill if it through further hearings as we proceed that there could be some assurance provided to those groups who do have concern?
Look, I've said it in the past. I'm always open to good faith amendments to a bill. That is part of the parliamentary process. If something is already there, I'm not inclined to be open to amendments which are redundant or already otherwise captured in the bill. I'm happy to look at the way in which the different definitions operate and analyze those, and I will obviously look at the CIJA submission very carefully. So open to good faith amendments, but if it's there and it's already captured, and the best legal advice that we have is that it doesn't need to be improved, then you're going to have to bear the burden of proof of trying to convince me.
Well, I note that as I read the exemptions, it does not clearly exempt all kinds of medical or therapeutic conversations. It simply provides an exemption for a practice, treatment, or service related to gender transition. And then the second exemption, I think, arguably is ambiguous. I would be interested in hearing, though, from the department officials as to whether there would be any problem with incorporating language into the bill that would provide greater certainty.
In 30 seconds or less.
I did ask the department officials initially. I understand the minister's response. The question that I am asking the department officials is, regardless of the minister's point of view on whether the language encapsulates what I am seeking, whether there would be specifically an issue with incorporating for greater certainty. I think it's an important question that does need to be addressed.
Mr. Daigle or Mr. Brookfield?
I believe his microphone is on mute.
We're having some technical challenges hearing you, Mr. Daigle. So perhaps if you can provide a written response to Mr. Cooper's question at a later time, and we're going to move on to the next round of questions.
Madam Chair, perhaps the department officials, once their issues are resolved with IT, perhaps they could provide an answer in the duration of this hour.
Absolutely, if we find that time. Thank you for raising that, Mr. Cooper. Now we're going to go on to Mr. Kellaway for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello, colleagues, and hello, ministers and their staff. My first two questions will be directed to the Minister Chagger, actually. And I'm really fascinated by your portfolio, Minister, because I think diversity and youth and inclusion are our future. I've worked for many years with young people in Cape Breton, Canso, and I really want to thank you for your hard work on ensuring that so many voices are heard. So through you to the Minister, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was the first Prime Minister to apologize to LGBTQ2 public servants and Canadian Armed Force members who were persecuted and discriminated against for being who they were. Now, I think this was a very important value statement from this government on standing up for Canadians that have long been marginalized. And my question to you, Minister, is how confident are you that this legislation works towards the same goal?
Madam Chair, through you to the member, thank you so much for that question. I'm very confident, actually. When we set out to have these conversations, I was not the minister at that time. So this work actually has continued over a series of 2 mandates. Since becoming Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, we've taken some steps that have actually built upon the work we have historically done. And so I think it's really important that this work continue to build upon it. When it comes to that, the apology, we've also had the first ever special advisor to the Prime Minister on LGBTQ issues, which was Randy Boissonnault. And since then, we've now had a full minister at the cabinet table. And in March of 2017, to continue engagement with LGBTQ2 communities in Canada, we've actually set up the first LGBTQ2 secretariat. And that's why I'm to see that my colleague and official Fernand Como is here and is building a fabulous team so that we can ensure that we are building back even better and consciously more inclusive. This legislation actually builds upon that work, so I'm very confident.
Thank you for that. I'm going to stay with you. Could you speak to some other non-legislative efforts, either that have been made or that we can anticipate will be made to combat conversion therapy?
One of the things that I'm proudest of is that this legislation was created by community for community. It is very concerning to me that individuals and Canadians that, we're so proud of our charter rights and freedoms, but are still having to undergo this conversion therapy. And experts have proven it to be harmful and destructive. And that's why, conversations exploring who you are entirely welcome and is not actually stopped within this legislation. We're always going to encourage those conversations. Some of the other stuff we've done is we've actually seen the blood ban go down to 3 months. but we have invested in research working through HEMA Quebec as well as Canada Blood Services because we want to see that blood ban lifted. There are a series of other programs and services we've offered, including LGBTQ2 Capacity Fund. So we were pleased to see some of those announcements made. We'll continue building upon that work. Thank you for those great questions.
Thank you, Minister Chagger. Minister Lametti, I think the fact that there are still individuals out there who are knowingly causing a person who's under the age of 18 years of age to undergo conversion therapy is really, it's unbelievable to me. And we've heard from many parliamentarians that this won't impact private conversations. I think you alluded to it in your opening statement, which don't constitute conversion therapy. Can the minister confirm this interpretation and why it is so important?
Well, look, we're trying to balance, obviously, legitimate exploratory conversations, as Minister Chagger just put it. I think it's the right way to put it. We're not trying to ban conversations, legitimate conversations that explore who a person is. What we're trying to do is ban conversations that tell you that who you are is wrong. And that you have to change, and that is that's what we're targeting. That's what the definition targets, and I think the definition does actually a very good job at targeting exactly what we have to do without being redundant. So in that way, we I think walk that very careful line between freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and legitimate exploration, legitimate teaching, legitimate mentoring, and legitimate conversation, and what is illegitimate, which is trying to through a practice change someone because there is this misguided notion that who they are is wrong. So I think the legislation does a good job with that, and I'm proud of it.
Thank you very much.
Those all your questions, Mr. Kellaway?
Those are my questions. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. And just for members, the phone lines for staff are now fully operational. Do let us know if there's any additional challenges. We'll now move on to Monsieur Fortin.
Mr. Fortin, you have 6 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Mr. Lametti, Ms. Chagger. The concerns that I have about this bill, well, we do support this bill in the Bloc Québécois. I do think that we need to have some control and we have to stop this kind of harmful practice of trying to convert people to heterosexual or cisgender identities. So you answered some of my questions on that I would have raised. Now, along the same lines, regarding what is acceptable or not, 320.101 says that this does not target services or practices dealing with the exploration of one's identity or sexual orientation. So I want to know what the bill means by exploratory conversations or the building of one's sexual identity. That seems like a vague definition to me. Thank you, Mr. Fortin. I assume that the question is for me. In the provision, we're talking about conversations that one might have between, say, a mentor and a pupil or a mentee or a parent with a child. Exploring someone's identity or sexual expression, orientation, but a conversation that is not part of a treatment or a practice to change somebody into what the person is not or does not want to be. So to change their identity or expression. So you're talking about conversations between parents or grandparents and children, but in 320.101 seems to restrict conversations between any professionals or pastoral counselors or teachers or any other person. I might have a discussion, for example, with the son of some neighbor, and I might say that, oh, he's being too heterosexual, he should try to act more homosexual. It isn't clear whether that's covered here. Wouldn't it be better to have a clear definition so that we know whether it falls under 320.101? We're not targeting here specific relationships and conversation because people can get opinions from professionals or a member of the family or someone else. In my opinion, it would be very difficult to really specifically restrict that kind of conversation. I agree with you, it would be difficult, but I think we're going to have to deal with that kind of situation. Well, we are talking here about practices. And practices, services, and treatments are fairly well defined in legislation. We wanted to really frame what was legally important in the definition. And I think that the definition is adequate. But if there are good faith suggestions, we will certainly take them into account. I've heard suggestions from a number of people that I have discussed this bill with, and they would like to appear. Some people feel that there needs to be more room, for example, for spiritual faith counselors or teachers. And some people think, on the contrary, that any discussion that centers on the exploration or building of one's sexual identity should be avoided. But it does not seem to be clear in the bill, and that concerns me. Mr. Fortin, I think you have answered your previous question. And I think that the two extremes there show that we've struck the right balance. I think that we need to have some clarity around those practices and services. I think there's a gray area here, and I think that the courts might come up with contradictory views and conclusions. I think that legislators need to be as clear as possible in legislation, and I'm not sure. In fact, I think that this can be interpreted very broadly. But, Minister, there's another aspect of concern to me, and that is the age of consent. We're talking here about people under the age of 18. In Quebec, the Civil Code allows children starting at age 14 to make decisions about their health. So here we have 18. How can you reconcile the decision made here by the legislator concerning the age of consent and that? And if you don't reconcile that, how did you choose age 18? I know the Civil Code very well. Yes, I know, because I've worked with it for many years. It is true that for medical treatment in Quebec, the age of consent is 14. We have the criminal code at the federal level, and 18 is the age of majority and consent throughout the criminal code. So this is an age that is familiar to people, and we can't completely restrict this we will want to make sure that children under the age of 18 are not subject to pressure.
Sure. Monsieur Fortin, you're out of.
Thank you.
We'll now go on to Mr. Garrison for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I hope you'll just indulge me for a moment as the NDP spokesperson for sexual orientation and gender identity. I just want to mark that today is World AIDS Day. And as a gay man of a certain age, I'm very happy we finally gotten to the point we can talk about elimination of HIV, which is a scourge of the entire population, no longer just of gay men. I tabled some order paper questions today, and I want to bring them attention of the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion about how the government plans to make sure the new testing methods are available to rural, remote, and marginalized communities, because the key to eradicating HIV is for those at risk to know their status. Now let me return to the topic at hand today, the bill. I do want to start out by saying that I remain very supportive of the bill as a whole, even though I remain disappointed that this isn't a complete ban on conversion therapy. So I want to go back to the Minister in Justice and discuss the exclusion of what people are calling consenting adults from this bill. And I know the Minister has said he fears a charter challenge, but I want to know whether, quite apart from that, he thinks that we might be able to add adults to this bill in a way which wouldn't endanger the whole bill if there were a charter challenge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. I appreciate your question, and I understand the very sincere place from which it is coming. We have tried, with respect to adults, to really restrict it to only consenting adults. So duress is a legally known concept, so that vulnerable people will be protected, if you will. Vulnerable adults will be protected, if you will, by the legislation. That being said, you're correct to say that I do fear a charter challenge. It is for a consenting adult capable of consenting, not undergoing any kind of not susceptible to duress or not being subjected to duress. It would be a difficult thing to defend in court. The best minds in my department tried to wrap their head around it and couldn't, because that was our starting position, I will admit. But if you can find a way, I'd be willing to consider it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I guess my problem was with the concept of consenting adults when it comes to conversion therapy, because we have some very well established legal principles that some things cannot be consented to which are harmful. So a person cannot consent to being wounded or physically assaulted. A person cannot consent to a fight club, for instance. And so in my mind, and I think of that of many experts, conversion therapy amounts to an assault. And so if we leave what are called consenting adults out of the bill, I guess I would like to suggest amendments that we specify very clearly all the various forms of lack of consent, or how we understand consent in the bill, as we've done in other parts of the criminal code.
Okay, once again, thank you. It is something that I think we tried to cover in the bill. If we can do it better, then we'd be willing to work. Again, the problem is always when you list, and the same is true for questions from some of your colleagues around the table, when you try to enumerate a list of practices or conversations or whatever one wants to allow or disallow, then it can create unintended consequences. That's my only caveat, but I'm always willing to work in good faith with good faith amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. The bill bans advertising, but it raises a question from some in the community about whether there are other kinds of promotion of conversion therapy that wouldn't strictly qualify as advertising, in particular in that they're unpaid. And so do you believe that unpaid promotion is covered in the bill at present?
We do believe that it is. It falls in the legal definitions for both paid and unpaid. again, happy to look at that, but we do think we were trying to cover it, and we do think we have covered it.
Thank you very much. Now, I know I've got very little time here, but I want to turn to the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion. You're currently doing a survey for an action plan, and I've had a look at the survey, and unfortunately, the survey doesn't actually ask any questions about actions. It does provide, I think, some useful, or will provide useful information on the current situation. But the bill doesn't talk about, it doesn't even ask questions like, do you support a ban on conversion therapy, or do you support the government doing any specific things? I wonder if the minister has plans to be more specific about what actions might be informed by this survey.
So I would like to thank not only through the chair to the member for his comments and the question, but also just for your advocacy and the fact that we are actually debating this legislation now at committee because of part of the foundation that you have laid. So I think when it comes to the conversation around conversion therapy, as has been stated tonight, I would agree that most Canadians agree it does not belong in Canada. And I think that's why it's important that the committee do its important work as to making sure that the legislation is correct. And I would echo the comments of Minister Lametti as to things that we believe we have covered. If they've not been, this is what we would like brought to our attention. But I would think that communities have expressed clearly that that's not out for the conversation. We know it needs to be banned. It does not belong in Canada. The purpose of the survey actually is about additional engagements as to what is communities expecting and how do we advance. So this is building upon the work that we're doing with the roundtables we've already held to make sure that our government is responding to communities and proactively ensuring that we're building back even better and consciously more inclusive. And that's also why Fernand is here joining me today, because the Secretariat is engaging with every single department and agency.
Thank you.
Our government.
Thank you, Minister. My apologies, we're out of time, Mr. Garrison. We're going to go into our second round of questions now, starting with Madame Finley for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, ministers, for being here today. My first question is for department officials. When this bill was originally introduced, our feedback was to include the language off the department's website into the bill. Today, we received a written brief from CIJA, an important Canadian advocacy organization that favors adoption of the original website language in the bill. However, at some later, more recent date, the language on the government's website was changed. Can the officials outline why that was done?
We still can't hear you, Mr. Daigle.
I think Mr. Daigle's, the arm of his device is down. Or it was, now it's off.
We're quickly changing the device.
I hope that doesn't run into my time, Madam Chair.
I've stopped your time for now. Maybe Mr. Brookfield or Mr. Daigle? We still can't hear you, sir. Okay. IT will be calling you one more time. In the meantime, Mr. Brookfield, if you'd like to add some words there.
Yes, can you hear me? No, it's supposed to work. Okay. Same problem.
Mr. Daigle, I think that your sound is coming back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello. Yes. So I'm very sorry about that. So as the minister has explained before, our view is that what we're criminalizing here is very clear. 3 terms that are used elsewhere in the criminal code. So a service, treatment, or practice. And that we didn't feel there was a need to go much further than that. Otherwise, we would be excluding things that we didn't intend to exclude.
Excuse me, sorry, Mr. Day, that wasn't my question. I'm not sure if you heard my full question with your
I did,
technical
yes.
difficulties. I'm asking why there was a change in the wording on the website. There was a word added that was not there before, so that's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, we didn't, when we draft a bill, we looked at a number of things, and we ended up proposing the bill that the ministers tabled in the House. What was on our website was general information about the intention, and ultimately we developed a bill that we're comfortable with, and we're prepared to answer questions on. We're also happy to.
I'm sorry, with respect, with respect, I understand that, but you're not answering my question. There was widespread interest in the wording on your website to begin with, and widespread support for that. But then it was changed after that. So, do you not have an answer for why you changed that?
We don't draft laws on the websites. We drafted a bill and to reflect the information that we obtained in our consultations, and we feel that our bill is very clear.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I must move on. I've only got so much time. Thank you very much. Under this legislation, how many individuals or organizations does the government expect to prosecute? This is for Minister Lametti. How do you foresee a case being built against those individuals?
Well, cases are built in the usual way. There is an investigation either based on a complaint or on other information through the police, and it goes through the prosecution service, which is depending either the provincial or the federal crown. But it is completely independent, as we have independent prosecution services in most provinces. And thanks to my predecessor, I believe Rob Nicholson, we have an independent prosecution service at the federal level, which I also support. And so we don't have very accurate statistics. We've said this before publicly about about conversion therapy, because so much of it happens in the shade. But a number of studies indicate that it is a widespread practice in Canada, and that it is having a significant destructive impact on the LGBTQ2 community in Canada, and therefore we're acting.
In that vein,
my apologies, Madame Findlay, but we're out of time. We'll go on to the next round for 5 minutes. Mr. Sangha, your time starts now, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks a lot. My question is to Minister Chaggar. Minister, there are hundreds upon hundreds of heartbreaking testimonies from young and older men about their journey through the eventually out of the conversion therapy. These stories tell a devastating consequences of the practice of conversion therapy and range from depression to suicidal thoughts. In fact, the interim result of the 2019-2020 survey shows that the sexual orientation, gender identity, and the depression changes efforts are affecting this. The bill before us is perhaps one of the most progressive piece of legislation by any government to ban, criminalize, and eliminate the deplorable activities, and was about the time. But however, Minister, let me ask you one question. How confident are you that this legislation is really what is needed at this time to tackle the practice of conversion therapy?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to the member for the question. I would like to begin by saying that I was really pleased to see that every single member of this committee, from every single party, voted in favor of Bill C6 in the House to have it sent to committee. And I'm hopeful that we'll continue to work together to send this bill back to the House in short order. What this shows is that we all agree that any systematic effort to change someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, in particular that of a child, is unacceptable in our communities and should be criminalized. The bill we have here does exactly that and lays the foundation for elimination of this harmful and destructive practice in our country. And I know that there is still a lot of work to do when it comes to getting LGBTQ2 Canadians to a place where they could live out their lives freely and without the threats of violence or discrimination like most Canadians do. And as the minister responsible for inclusion and as an ally, I will continue to work with LGBTQ2 communities to lead the commitment of our government to stand up for LGBTQ2 rights. LGBTQ2 rights are human rights. And I would just say in a short answer to the member, I'm very confident that this is an essential step to building a consciously inclusive Canada.
Thank you, Minister. I really agree with you for all these things. But there is I don't agree that it's not a moral, it's not good to have this type of conversion therapies. So what is your, how you want to elaborate more on that moral aspect of that, which is to be included in this law, it to be considered?
The way I look at this and based on the conversations I've had is in Canada, I want every individual to be their authentic selves and to be contributing members of society. I want individuals to be proud of who they are. And unfortunately, with the practice of conversion therapy, that is not the case. The way I see this legislation is if an individual is looking to explore their identity and discover who they are, and you're helping them on that journey in a supportive way, it's entirely acceptable. If an individual is looking to explore their identity and who they are, and you are forcing them to be something or someone that they are not, it is unacceptable and does not belong in Canada.
Do you think, Minister, this conversion therapy, this against the conversion therapy, this bill will bring some changes into the morality of the people, those who want to do this, come forward with them, they are going for the conversion therapy. Are they going to be morally taught that don't do this thing, it's not good in the society?
So consenting adults who want to are not, they will get to make their choices as adults. What I think we are trying to get to is allowing every individual to be proud of who they are. An individual usually is trying to satisfy those around them and therefore is considering conversion therapy because they think they can change who they are. But you are who you are and you are absolutely perfect the way you are. I think my morals and my values actually are about lifting individuals to be their true selves in every single quality and every single expression that they provide. So for people who are having the conversation on their morals, I think those are individual conversations, and that's why we are making sure that all rights are being protected, including LGBTQ2 rights.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, Mr. Sangha. We'll now go to Monsieur Fortin for 2.5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lametti, I want to come back to you. Not that I didn't like your answers, Ms. Changer, but I'm dealing with particular points of law. I only have 2 minutes, which isn't very long, but I just want to come back to this unfortunate definition. I think what is being excluded is the same thing as what is being included. We know that we're dealing with young children and we're dealing with minors and we're dealing with things against their will. So we're talking about practices, services, or treatments that try to change people's identity or orientation, but not with open discussion. So what is the distinction you see between the one and the other, between gender transition, so you can allow services for that, but not for changing people? Well, what we're talking about here is therapies that are approved by health professionals and experts that are supported by provincial health systems. No, I'm talking here about whether we're not talking about services that are requested by a consenting adult, but we're talking about where somebody is a minor, whether something is done against the will, but gender transitions are okay? I don't quite understand. We're not talking here about legitimate practices where someone is exploring their identity or orientation or whether they are transitioning to a different gender expression. We're talking about adults with their informed consent. But when it comes to minors and heteronormative practices, we're talking about trying to change somebody who is not heterosexual. I'm sorry, Mr. Fortin.
We'll go on. We'll go on to Mr. Garrison for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Garrison.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to turn to a question that many in the community have been asking about this bill, and that's whether it adequately covers the practices that are sometimes directed at people, that are sometimes directed at people who have a different gender expression than others. So while the bill is quite clear on the traditional attempts to convert or change someone's sexual orientation, when it comes to gender identity and gender expression, there's a concern that the bill does not capture the full extent of those questions. I would be happier if the bill used language consistent with Bill C-16, which specifically protects gender identity and gender expression. But I wonder if the minister can tell me if he does believe that gender expression is covered by the bill as written.
We thought it was, but you rightly point out Bill C-16 and a difference in language there, and I would be open to suggestions from the committee if you feel that we didn't adequately harmonize those two definitions. So we do think gender expression ought to be included, and in an ideal world, the language would be consistent. So we're open to an amendment in that regard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I guarantee you'll get one. My last question to Minister Chagger. Passing a law which bans conversion therapy, of course, doesn't really address the trauma experienced by survivors. And I wonder if there are any plans, specific plans for her ministry to provide funding to the community to help provide programming to address the trauma of survivors of conversion therapy.
I would like to thank you for the question to the chair, and that's what the action plan and the survey are all about. There are opportunities to contribute for us to. What I've gained from my conversations with members of communities is that there are certain harms that we aren't going to be able to undo, but we need to try, and we need to make sure that the next generation does not have to undergo this. And that's why we will continue consulting and working with communities. This legislation was informed and developed by communities. And that's why I think it is quite powerful. And I once again will thank Minister Lametti for actually recognizing the discrepancy between C6 and Bill C-16 from a former government, and to make sure that we do include that. So yes, let's work together to make sure that we are consciously building inclusive in Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you to both ministers.
Thank you very much. We'll now go into Mr. Moore for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister Lametti and Minister Chagger, for your appearance here today at Justice Committee. Minister Lametti, I want to jump right into the definition, because we're trying to get a bill here that does certainly what you said it would do in your press conference, and what your department has said it would do, but there is uncertainty around the definition, and this bill hangs on the definition. I heard you say, 5 minutes ago that your best minds put together this bill, and then I heard you say a minute ago that, well, we missed something there in syncing up with Bill C-16. So there, in the early discussion on this bill, much was said about your comments and the Justice Department's website, which laid out what the bill did not do. And it said personal views on sexual orientation, sexual feelings, gender identity are expressed, such as where teachers, school counselors, pastoral counselors, faith leaders, doctors, mental health professionals, friends or family members provide support to persons struggling with their sexual orientation, sexual feelings, or gender identity. There has been some, including today, I saw a brief from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs who have said, look, we're 100% against a conversion therapy, but for greater certainty. And I know you believe in for greater certainty clauses because there's two of them in this very bill. And they're saying for greater certainty, would you include the language that you've spoke in this bill? And I do want to give you the opportunity to answer a question that was put to Justice Department officials is once this became public that people said, please put this in the bill, the department website changed. And instead of saying friends or family members provide support, the word affirming was added in there. And I want to know what is the background on that? Why was the website changed? And I think this plays into some of the fears that people have around this bill, a bill that just 2 years ago, your government said, well, this isn't necessary. It's handled at the provincial level. And you've said that you don't have clear statistics on, but now we've got a criminal code amendment. Criminal code is the highest sanction we can bring against people as a government. So we want to make sure that this bill does what you said it would do. So why was that changed on the website, Minister?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for the question. We're here because we feel, and we're going to use the criminal code because we feel this practice is abhorrent and it needs to be eradicated in Canadian society. It's going to coordinate with what the provinces are already doing and reinforce what the provinces are already doing. We'll go back and look at the website to see if it in fact has changed. But certainly in terms of a definition in an act, a number of lawyers around the table, including myself, what you're trying to do in a definition is succinctly capture the activity you want to capture without capturing more than that. There is a danger of over-defining, and so a long list can be either over-inclusive or under-inclusive. You get into debates about whether it's a closed list or an open list. So what we've done is focus on the practice, and everything that you have identified, everything that was identified in your question is in fact captured by this definition, by the focus on practice, treatment, or service. We're not capturing those very legitimate kinds of conversations that you cited in your question. So I think the manner in which we have framed it in the Act, from a juridical point of view, is the way to do it. I think we've done it well, without redundancy and without need for greater certainty clause. We'll certainly look at what CJA has said, but certainly I haven't heard anything yet that convinces me that the definition is inadequate. We're focusing on illegitimate practices, treatments, or services designed for prohibited objectives without going further than that.
You have 20 seconds left, Mr. Moore.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Just to point out that this bill already contains 2 for greater certainty measures. I think the message that we got from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, we're going to hear that probably more than once from good faith witnesses who want to get at the root of this issue, but also want to ensure the things that you said this bill does not do, that it in fact does not do. I would encourage you to continue to be open to the idea of that type of amendment. Thank you.
I'm always open to good faith amendments, but you always have to be careful with redundancy, and that can create unintended consequences down the road. So we'll be careful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now go to our last round with Mr. Zuberi for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
I want to thank both ministers for being here today and giving the time to the committee. I want to clarify something that Mr. Lametti, you already touched upon, which was what the bill does and does not criminalize. And although it's I think very clear to us on the committee, but just for the benefit of for all of us, so we can pass on the message, to reiterate, please. My understanding is that the bill does not criminalize conversations within families, with friends, teachers, social workers, psychologists, faith leaders. Can you just expand upon that?
Thank you. I presume the question is for me, Mr. Zuberi. Thank you. Once again, what we are trying to do is criminalize conversations that begin with the presumption that who you are is wrong and that it has to be changed, and it's done through an active practice, treatment, or service. Those are the prohibitive objectives in the Act. So they are not, we're not trying to criminalize the legitimate kinds of mentoring conversations that people have, pastoral conversations, family conversations, parent-child, grandparent-child, where there is the legitimate question is, who am I, and how do I develop it in that framework. So we have, in order to capture the kind of activity we want to capture, we focused on known legal concepts, practice, treatment, or service, and we have specified the objective, the prohibited objectives. We think that does legally what we need to do. We think it dovetails well with definitions that are being used at the provincial level with respect to provincial medical systems and medical insurance systems in the provinces. So we think we have defined what we need to define in a fairly clear way.
Thank you. And for my next question, I'd like to touch upon peer review literature, and just to, if either minister is aware of the impacts of conversion therapy upon people. In particular, what does the literature say with respect to validity, efficacy, or ethics, please?
I guess that's me again. The peer review literature on the medical side is universally condemning this kind of practice, and some feel it's tantamount to torture. I happen to agree with that. It has devastating lifelong impacts on people. You're going to hear that in your committee witnesses from people who come before you. We certainly saw it in the consultation process that we engaged in before the bill. Absolutely destructive, and the peer review literature confirms that.
Thank you. And just to what has been raised thus far in the questions and answers by other members, the term coaches doesn't appear in, if we were to have an exhaustive list of individuals who can enter into conversations, exploratory conversations, the term coaches doesn't appear, for example. How do you feel about limiting the categories of individuals who can enter into the exploratory conversations versus not limiting, and what those impacts are?
Well, your question indicates why I have a very serious reservation towards listing people, because there are so many, as I answered to Mr. Fortin in French, we don't want to limit the possibilities for people to seek advice, to have mentors wherever they happen to be. If we try to have an enumerated list of categories of people, you're always going to miss people. You're going to over-include, you're going to under-include, and you're going to create problems down the road. And ultimately, you may actually do damage by preventing someone from having a conversation he or she may want to have with someone because they're not on the list and therefore not protected. So there are all kinds of unintended consequences with elaborating that list. I am very much in favor of the approach we have taken in terms of the definition of the practice and the goal. And I think that does the legal work it needs to do in a very effective, efficient, and concise way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank Minister Lametti and Minister Chagger for your time today. And I will remind the departments If there are questions, and I believe Mr. Cooper did have a question that we were not able to answer because of technical challenges, if you can send a written response, that would be wonderful, and to clarify any other questions raised as well. Thank you very much. We'll suspend for 30 seconds as we let in our witnesses for the next panel. Thank you again, ministers. Really appreciate it. With us today in our second panel on Bill C6, Matt Ashcroft, Dr. Christopher Wells, Dr. Kenneth Zucker, all appearing as individuals, and we have representatives from Pour les droits des femmes de Québec, Ghislaine Gendron, who is the president, and Dr. James Cantor, who is the advisor for that organization. Before we go into a round of questions, for the 5 minutes per witness, for their opening remarks. We'll quickly go to Jacques Maziadi, who's our legislative clerk, and Isabel D'Souza, who is legislative counsel, for very, very brief remarks on proposing amendments and how that's going to work. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few seconds to tell the committee that I will be the legislative clerk responsible for Bill C6. As you said, my name is Jacques Maziad. If the member of the committee want to have information about the admissibility of their amendments, don't hesitate to send them to me. Switch in French.
You can also, that is, the members of the committee can contact me if they have any questions about the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. You have my contact information. That was in the note sent to you by the clerk last week. And so, Madam Chair, I will give the floor to my colleague, Isabel D'Souza, our legislative advisor.
Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Isabel D'Souza. I am the legislative counsel assigned to Bill C6 for the purpose of drafting amendments. I am here today to tell you a little about the drafting process itself. I strongly encourage you to send me your amendment request as soon as possible in your own words, even if your proposals aren't entirely concrete yet. I will transform your instructions into legislative text in order to produce the desired legal effects. I will also inform you if your proposals raise legal, jurisdiction, or charter issues, and I will suggest alternatives if possible. Keep in mind that all our exchanges are confidential and nonpartisan. Note that the amendment process is like a miniature version of the private member's bill drafting process for those who are familiar with it. So we'll go through a draft, approval, proofreading, translation, and revision of each amendment. This process can sometimes be lengthy depending on the complexity of the requests or the volume of requests received. And because we sometimes draft amendments for several bills at the same time. As such, it can take several hours or even days to arrive at a final product. For those reasons, do send me your requests for amendments as soon as possible. I understand the deadline for submission is December 9. That date is not that far away. Also, please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or concerns. I am here to help. Thank you for your time today. Jacques and I will now take questions about the process if there are any.
Thank you very much. I will ask members if they do have questions to connect with you directly so that we can continue with our agenda for the day. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now turn to Mr. Ashcroft, Matt Ashcroft, for 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, thank you to Randall Garrison and his team for inviting me to speak. It feels quite good that we have developed a great relationship since March. And I'm thankful that you spoke with Erica Muse and I about the next steps of Bill C6. This bill is extremely important to survivors of conversion therapy practices, including myself, because I know the harm firsthand that can be done from conversion therapy practitioners, even though they do not fully identify with the vocabulary of conversion therapy. Before I get into my speech, I'm going to say the names with the first names and the last initial of the folks that were in my conversion therapy camp, honoring their names and honoring their confidentiality. Those names are/were John S., J.C., CJ or Calvin James W., Adam W., Stephen M., Jerry M., Dean K., Rick S., Rocky M. I do not know if they are here or not, but just so you know, I think about your well-being every day. To my brothers and sister, Milton, Marlon, Makai, and Mayana, I am glad that I have a relationship with you again. You have all grown into great people, and I'm glad you accept me for me. I love you always. Never forget that. Now that I got that out of the way, I'm going to go into the heart of my speech. And if you really care what I say, you will listen with an open mind and an open heart. Talk is cheap. Doing this process without conversing with conversion therapy survivors is quite sad. It is sad because I'm a human being that experienced this. When there are press interviews about having the best legislation in the world and use conversion therapy survivors as a prop to make you look good, it hurts. Furthermore, it is something that I'm used to because in conversion therapy, we were used as success stories. Not only that I'm grieving this, I'm grieving this bill will not protect Canadians that it claims to protect. The Sex Now survey estimates 47,000 people have experienced conversion therapy practices. If only 35% of the folks are under the age of 18, that means that this bill only protects 16,450 Canadians, leaving out 2/3 of the population. We need to do our best to protect as many queer, trans, and non-binary Canadians as possible. So talk is cheap. Canadian government, do you really want the best of the world and protect the LGBTQ2IA plus folks like you say you do? Last time I remember when St. Albert had done their conversion therapy bylaw, you wanted provincial government to do their own bans and not touch it federally. Where's the transparency in what you were doing? If you really want to do action, here are the first steps I recommend you take. The Australian Victorian government are the ones that worked extremely hard on their bill and is being the most incomprehensive bill in the world. Thank you to Nathan Despot, co-founder of the organization Brave Network Melbourne, for your words of wisdom. I have learned a lot from having global conversations on what other countries are doing. I am reiterating the exact wording on his social media. Number one, it will ban all conversion practices delivered by anyone to anyone, regardless whether they are paid, unpaid, delivery by a professional or a non-professional, or delivered to an adult or a child. It will also ban inducing a person to undergo conversion practices, as well as referrals, regardless of whether it is professional or non-professional. There will be a criminal penalty for all these things when injury to health, example, mental health, can be proven. If the criminal threshold can't be met, it will go through a civil process led by the VEOHRC, the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. This will require mediation of any kind. VEOHRC will be able to investigate and provide penalties. Failure to comply will also lead to criminal penalties. Number two, it would be a criminal offense to advertise paid and unpaid conversion practices. Number three, it will be a criminal offense to try to get around the law by taking a person into another state, in our case, province, territory, or outside the country. Number four, adults will not be deemed able to consent to participate in conversion practices, i.e. informed consent is not possible. You cannot consent to abuse. If every medical association deems conversion therapy practices are discredited and unproven, you should have no issues including adults. It is time for the government to be more transparent and protect queer, trans, and non-binary Canadians you claim to ally with. While we're on the subject, you also need to include trans conversion therapy into legislation, or how to uncourt trans medical malpractice in future legislation.
Thank you.
This is not a game, this is our lives.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Ashcroft. My apologies, we're out of time. I will now go to Dr. Christopher Wells for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Today I'm speaking with you from the Edmonton area on Treaty 6 territory. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address the committee, in particular on World AIDS Day. Today we are fighting against another form of discrimination, prejudice, and stigma in the form of conversion therapy. In support of my comments today, I have submitted a written brief and would like to draw the committee's attention to our national report entitled Conversion Therapy in Canada, a Guide for Legislative Action, which includes 15 national endorsements from many public sector and LGBTQ2 organizations, background information and research, and most importantly, the voices and the experiences of the brave Canadian survivors of conversion therapy, like Matt, who support legislative action to help end this fraudulent and abusive practice. I would like to congratulate the Government of Canada for its leadership and action against conversion therapy, which is not therapy at all, but a recognized form of coercion and abuse, and in some cases may rise to the level of torture as defined by the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims and the United Nations Independent Expert on Protection Against Violence and Discrimination based on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. I strongly support Bill C6 as an important legislative initiative to help bring awareness to the issue of conversion therapy and its associated harm, and to provide an important mechanism for victims to seek protection and redress through the Criminal Code of Canada. The bill also sends an important message to all Canadians about the inherent dignity, self-worth, and respect that should be afforded to LGBTQ2 people. Fundamentally, no one should have to change who they are or who they love to find acceptance and support in their faith, family, or community. The research is clear. Conversion therapy has been shown to be an unethical, harmful, and dangerous practice. Almost all leading health, medical, and professional associations have denounced conversion therapy and its associated practices. In Canada, an open letter supporting the research consensus against conversion therapy has been signed by 120 Canadian academics and public policy experts, including 16 distinguished research chairs. I would like to focus my remaining comments on 3 critical areas to consider as potential amendments for Bill C6. These include the need to align and clarify the definition of conversion therapy, extending protections to include all adults in the legislation, and third, providing support for victims and survivors of conversion therapy efforts. First, the proposed definition of conversion therapy in Bill C6 should use a more standard and consistent definition that is currently in wide use within many municipal bylaws and provincial territorial acts prohibiting conversion therapy. Rather than focusing on particular identities or directional orientation, these legislative definitions should use plain language and include clearly understood grounds against discrimination, which are protected in all provincial and territorial human rights acts in Canada. For example, Bill C6 ought to align with the Canadian Human Rights Act by explicitly including protections against change efforts directed at any person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Some simple amendments would help refine the definition in Bill C6 and reinforce that all forms of conversion therapy are prohibited, and would also clarify which practices are not included and considered acceptable in helping individuals find appropriate support. The key here is that all approaches should be objective, neutral, and non-judgmental to outcome, and focused on empowering the individual to be active in discovering and understanding their own identity. Historically, conversion therapy efforts have been grounded in an anti-LGBTQ2 ideology, with the underlying belief that LGBTQ2 people are pathological, disordered, or sinful. In short, needing a so-called cure or correction away from deviance into normalcy. Secondly, currently Bill C6 as drafted only prevents forced conversion therapy for adults. Because of the clear evidence of harm and the lack of research evidence of efficacy, the notion of informed consent is not a possible justification for conversion therapy. Given the well-documented and known harms of conversion therapy, it is a reasonable limitation to restrict so-called consenting adults from engaging in conversion therapy practices. The government has an obligation to protect all individuals from known or reasonably foreseeable harms and dangers, which is why they have strict consumer protection laws and numerous medical and health regulations in Canada. Clearly, restrictions are reasonable and justifiable limitations on individual rights and freedoms. As notable examples, Quebec's Bill 70 and many municipal bylaws apply to all ages, individuals, or groups. And lastly, it is imperative that the federal government work with survivors and LGBTQ civil society organizations to establish an education program and compensation fund to support victims of conversion therapy. Pursuing legal recourse through the Criminal Code of Canada sets a very high bar, and support is needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wells, Dr. Wells. We'll now go to Dr. Kenneth Zucker for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address your committee. I am a clinical and research psychologist. Since 1976, I have seen over 1,600 children and adolescents who experience gender dysphoria. I was the chair of the Sexual and Gender Identity Disorders Work Group, who was part of the task force for the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, published by the American Psychiatric Association. I have published over 300 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on this topic, so I feel that I have the necessary background to address elements of Bill C-6. Up front, let me state that I am in full agreement that mental health clinicians should not attempt to change the sexual orientation of individuals under the age of 18 years. However, I want to point out quite strongly that contemporary mental health clinicians do not engage in such practice and have not done so for decades. Mental health clinicians do not practice conversion therapy with gay, lesbian, or bisexual adolescents. Where I disagree quite strongly with Bill C-6 is its additional focus on gender identity in children and adolescents. Since the state of California passed similar legislation in 2012, there has been an insidious conflation of sexual orientation and gender identity. Not only does the proposed legislation erroneously conflate two very distinct psychological phenomena, it also completely ignores developmental considerations. The original criticisms of sexual orientation change efforts were targeted at the unsuccessful efforts by clinicians who tried to change the sexual orientation of adults. Bill C-6, by conflating sexual orientation, now targets clinicians who work with children as young as the age of 3 years and their parents. In my view, this is a serious mistake. Do politicians appreciate this conflation? The background scientific material provided to this committee by Phillips and Walker is completely silent with regard to what is known about best practice therapy for children and adolescents with gender dysphoria. No well-trained mental health clinician attempts to coercively change the gender identity of either a child or an adolescent. Well-trained clinicians consider what the best therapeutic approach might be to reduce gender dysphoria, a mental health diagnosis in the DSM-5, and the distress associated with it. And there are various ways in which this can be accomplished. The problem with Bill C-6 is as follows. At point 5 at section 320.101, it defines conversion therapy in part as a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's gender identity to cisgender. Yet, in the same paragraph, it states that this does not include a practice, treatment, or service that relates to a person's exploration of their identity or to its development. Bill C-6, like many initiatives that have preceded it, is completely vacuous in defining what such exploration would look like or constitute. Let me give you a couple of examples. A 3-year-old boy expresses a very strong desire to be a girl. When asked why he wants to be a girl, he tells his parents that he likes very much to play with Barbie dolls and to wear dresses. Under Bill C-6, can a mental health clinician explore with such a child this belief? For example, would it be acceptable to point out that boys can play with Barbie dolls too? A 7-year-old boy expresses a very strong desire to be a girl. When asked why, he says that all the boys in his classroom at school are mean and rough. In contrast, all the girls in his classroom are kind and gentle. He does not want to be mean or to play rough. Under Bill C-6, can a mental health clinician explore with such a child these beliefs? For example, would it be acceptable to point out that not all boys are mean and rough and that not all girls are kind and gentle? A 14-year-old girl expresses a very strong desire to be a boy. The girl also has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, which includes the propensity to think in very binary terms. Because she does not feel like other girls, she thinks that the only option is to be a boy. Under Bill C-6, can a mental health clinician explore with this adolescent the idea that there are many ways that one can be a girl? In my view, Bill C-6 should be modified in one of two ways. Delete entirely any reference to gender identity and restrict it to sexual orientation, the original target of criticism of conversion therapy. Failing that, Bill C-6 should be extensively revised in terms of explaining the scope of what exactly it means to engage in exploration of gender identity or to its development. In other words, provide objective markers. Such a revision would help both clinicians and family who have a child or adolescent experiencing gender dysphoria understand what the legislation truly intends to target. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now go to the organization Pour les droits des femmes de Québec. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Oui, bonjour.
Good afternoon. I would first like to correct something. I am not the president of my organization. I'm the representative of our gender identities working group, and I'm accompanied by Dr. James Cantor, who has been the advisor for the organization in this area, and I will give Dr. Cantor a few seconds just to introduce himself, and then I will speak.
Much. I only have a few minutes to say. I hope today to support Bill C6, except for the inclusion of gender identity, because the bill treats it the same as sexual orientation. As a clinical psychologist and research scientist, I've been providing therapy and publishing on the neuroscience of human sexuality for over 25 years now, including helping many transsexuals successfully to transition. I've served as a senior scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, editor-in-chief of the journal Sexual Abuse, and associate professor at the University of Toronto, and I'm currently the director of the Toronto Sexuality Center. Finally, I'm also an openly gay man. I was lucky to have appropriate and supportive therapy when I was a teenager, now long ago, and I feel honored to have the opportunity to help ensure that future generations have access to it. So I'm therefore here today to help provide 3 perspectives. That of a scientist to point out that this legislation mistakes the content of the current science, that a mental health care provider, that of a mental health care provider to note that this bill would cause a chill effect, inhibiting my and others' ability to act in my patient's best interests, and 3, that of a member of the GLBT community itself, to describe this as exactly how this is affecting my brothers and sisters. Thank you. I look forward to your question.
So thank you. Thank you, James. I would like to thank the members of the committee for inviting our organization, PDF Quebec. Last September 2019, we received an email from a young woman about her treatment for gender dysphoria. She has detransitioned now that she is an adult, and I want to read what she said. She said, when I was a teenager, my menstruation was so painful and heavy that it disrupted my education, but my doctor didn't help me obtain a proper care. And that's when I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I became known to the psychiatrist because I was hospitalized a number of times. I became obsessed with the idea of being perfect and my appearance. I didn't find myself acceptable as a woman. So after contacting gender identity groups online, I found my escape, which was to transition. I had access to hormone blockers, testosterone, and a mastectomy. The psychiatric team following me noticed that I became more aggressive, and I tried to commit suicide. This was a way to escape who I was rather than accepting myself. I stopped hormones after 3 years, but some effects are not reversible. I got into debt because of my breast implants, and going back is not as easy as the transition itself. I would point out that she was a minor at the time that she had the mastectomy, and she had a diagnosed personality disorder before she started. And she received this gender affirmation therapy, and unfortunately, many other young girls do as well. Dr. Tantor can talk about that as well. Twice as many girls as boys are affected by gender dysphoria, although recent statistics go in the other direction. And This is not mentioned or explained. Girls, therefore, are facing this difficulty, but in the legislative summary for Bill C6, we don't hear about this. This morning, we had to change our statement right at the last minute because just 3 hours or so ago, the BBC announced a new element that I want to share with the committee. The UK Superior Court has stated that children under the age of 16 with gender dysphoria are unlikely to be able to give informed consent for treatment with puberty-blocking drugs. This is a historic decision. Kira Bell, who's a young girl who has detransitioned, has just won her case against the British health system. And because the national department here has not been included.
For your remarks, we'll go into our first round of questions, starting with Mr. Moore for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each of the witnesses that are appearing here today on Bill C6. We appreciate you taking the time to give your perspective on this piece of legislation. And for our part, we want to make sure that we get this legislation right and that it does what it says that it's going to do. Dr. Zucker, I want to ask a question to you. If you could speak a little more, you're mentioning the definition and challenges with the definition, and that's something that we've identified. You know, the minister in his remarks when this bill was introduced gave lengthy remarks about what the bill doesn't do, and he says that it doesn't criminalize many things, including expression of views on sexual orientation, sexual feelings, gender identity, such as where teachers, school counselors, pastoral counselors, faith leaders, doctors, mental health professionals, friends or family members provide support to persons struggling with their sexual orientation, sexual feelings, or gender identity. And one of the, we're starting to get feedback from different stakeholder groups throughout Canada. And one of the concerns that has been raised is, well, if this is what the bill purports to not do, if this is what the minister says it doesn't do, then to fix the definition, the language, strengthen the definition so it more narrowly focuses on what all of our goal is, and that is to make sure that people are not subjected to conversion therapy. Can you maybe explore a little further your thoughts on the definition and how what you see as faults with the definition as it's currently construed? Because it's our job as parliamentarians to make sure that we get this bill right. And at the committee level, this is where we get that feedback and can perhaps have amendments that would improve the bill.
Sure, I'll try to answer that. So in science, we have a term called an operational definition, meaning we have a particular term and then we have to define it in a way that everybody can agree on what it is one is actually measuring. And my point about Bill C6, it's very similar to all prior legislations, including Bill 78 in Ontario, is there's this does not apply clause, which I read out to you as it does not include practices, etc., that relates to a person's exploration of their identity. But that is a completely vague descriptor. It does not give clinicians clear guidance of what is considered acceptable in terms of exploration. And I think That is a fundamental problem. It's frightening to parents because they worry that they're going to be accused of taking their kids for conversion therapy, whereas in fact, any well-trained clinician, as I said earlier, does not coercively try to change a child or adolescent's gender identity. I think a well-trained clinician engages in all kinds of exploration. The problem with Bill C6 is it doesn't define what that means or doesn't mean. And I think that is a very serious issue.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. And maybe to you, Dr. Cantor or Dr. Zucker on this question, but do you feel that the language, if you're saying in your testimonies that the language is too vague and not certain enough so that we don't know what is or what is not captured, and if there's a reluctance on the part of the government, we had the minister here in a prior session, and I've asked him if he'll accept an openness to amendments that would help to narrow in on what exactly we're talking about in the definition. Is there a concern on either of your part that there would be a chill in the healthcare professionals when it comes to dealing with young people that are trying to navigate, for example, gender dysphoria?
If I may, I think that is probably the most likely outcome, is that we will indeed see a chill effect. Psychologists especially are a relatively, in their way, conservative group. People will, if there's a lot of trouble, there's a lot of activist language about that. There's a lot of political angling going on. Many practitioners would simply result, I don't want to get involved. I'm not an expert, or I'm not expert enough in order to really make this an issue, and would just shy away from seeing any of these clients. We will end up with clinicians, exactly as you put it, with a chill effect, simply unwilling to deal with this kind of issue. The service will become unavailable without a clear indication that of what counts as an exploration. And exactly what that means, anybody would have trouble going into this with the kind of confidence that a clinician needs in order to help their client. To say that we're exploring, or to say that a client is exploring their gender identity, is to assert that there exists a concrete gender identity that we nearly need to shut up and observe. There's no evidence for that for gender identity. We have evidence for that for sexual orientation, but we cannot treat gender identity as if it's the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now go to our next round of questions with Mr. Virani for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So first of all, to Mr. Ashcroft, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for your courage in presenting here and for elucidating a lot of important thoughts for us to consider. I wanted to voice some agreement with some of what I've heard, particularly from Dr. Wells, in terms of even the term therapy seems a bit of a misnomer here, because what we're talking about is forcible imposed treatment on individuals, and that's not therapy at all from my perspective either. And what informs this, particularly when we're talking today on World AIDS Day, and we've talked about historic discrimination in respect of that issue for the LGBTQ2 community, what we're talking about here is just the freedom to be who you are and to love whom you want to love. So that's what informs everything that we're doing. Mr. Wells, I want to ask you a few questions. And the first question I'll ask you, if I could ask you just to be about 30 or 45 seconds in your responses, is, from my perspective, this bill is quite clear in terms of what is an offense. It is an offense under the code pursuant to this bill, if it passes, to force someone to undergo something that they're not consenting to, regardless of age. Does that provide the clarity that people need, including medical practitioners? So, Mr. Wells?
Yeah, so I don't think the issue is around forced conversion therapy or associated practices, but this notion of, can someone consent to what is inherently a fraudulent practice, such as conversion therapy? There isn't scientific evidence that supports its efficacy to change someone's sexual orientation, gender identity. And so, you can't, how do you consent to something that is unscientific, that is based in an anti-LGBTQ ideology? So That's why many people want the inclusion of adults. This notion of consenting adults is just a complete misnomer. And likewise, if I may just briefly, the problem with the legislation is in some cases it says conversion therapy is not acceptable for minors, but in other cases it can be acceptable for adults. So it really sends a mixed message about the harms and dangers of conversion therapy by creating these artificial distinctions based on age.
But just further to the point of consent, so if from a medical practitioner's perspective, as long as they're presumed medical practitioners do this all the time in terms of obtaining consent for various treatments, this treatment or others, as long as that consent is obtained, then there would be an immunization for prosecution, I would have thought. Is that a fair assessment?
Currently how this legislation is worded, and that's a concern from the LGBTQ community. I'll give you the example of a young adult who is in a vulnerable situation, age 18 to 25, who may be forced to undergo conversion therapy because of pressure from their family, from their cultural or community or faith community, and they're not consenting to the practice. They know, what's the choice? I have to undergo this or I get kicked out of my home. And we know that the LGBT community is vastly overrepresented in the homeless population. And the large reason for that is the lack of family acceptance.
Okay, and let's talk a bit about that, because a lot of people have said that this is going to somehow criminalize conversations between parents, etc. And we've heard about this notion of a list, and it was covered extensively in the last session with the ministers. I'm personally of the view that the second you wade down into enumerating a list, you risk not capturing an individual. And it was raised earlier that people like music instructors or soccer coaches aren't included in the list that was apparently on the website at one point. What is the danger of enumerating a list as opposed to targeting a practice, treatment, or service?
Certainly, as the minister has said, it's what's not listed then somehow gets deemed as permissible or acceptable. So I think people are missing the point in the conversation of a list. If your practices, your conversations are objective, they're neutral, they don't have a predetermined outcome, then you really have nothing to worry about because you're not engaging in conversion therapy. It is often those who are engaged in conversion therapy are the ones speaking the loudest for this kind of list or these kinds of exemptions. What the government is proposing here, the legislation is not that different than what has been proposed and been in operation in Canada and in different provinces or territories and at municipal levels. I think Calgary, for example, the city of Calgary has a great example. They have very clear legislation, and then they developed the frequently asked questions and put it on their website. This is where you could get into these specific kinds of examples to show how this legislation might be interpreted in practice. I agree, it doesn't need to be enumerated in legislation.
Thank you. And just quickly to Mr. Ashcroft, I mean, you gave us very compelling testimony about your own personal experience. We know that a lot of the evidence also indicates that people who are forced into conversion therapy often experience depression and even suicidal ideation. Could you comment upon that, upon the importance of actually the life and death nature of this kind of treatment, and by stopping this treatment, what it does to prevent suicide?
I'll give you an example of my story. When I went to a conversion therapy camp, I saw somebody reenact somebody else's rape in front of my eyes. I can't get the screams of that man that I have mentioned in my testimony out of my head. It does cause depression. It does cause suicidal ideations. It's documented. It's quite scary that we have to be in spaces like this, so that way that we can bring equity and justice to queer, trans, and non-binary folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Virani. We'll now move to Monsieur Fortin for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Ms. Gendron. For her organization as a representative, I understand from what you said, and Dr. Cantor and others as well, you agree with the idea of prohibiting conversion therapies. If I take the definition of under 320.101, it says that conversion therapies are intended to change an individual's sexual orientation, but there is nothing about there is an allowance for support for people who are transitioning and so on. So what is excluded is almost the same as the opposite of what is included. So I would like to know whether you think it would be better to say good faith, neutral conversations about a person's exploration of their identity or its development would be allowed for, rather than to focus on practices, treatments, and services. Our group, well, what is in B is really about conversations. But in fact, the problem isn't conversations, but psychotherapy surrounding exploration. Because people should not self-diagnose their gender identity. They should have access to psychotherapy that won't necessarily include biomedicalization. In other words, our big concern in our organization is that children and their parents can have access to medicalized interventions, but they should be able to have access only to psychotherapy and should not be criminalized, because girls, and I would like to hear from Dr. Cantor about this, but girls with autism or personality disorders end up in gender identity clinics, and they've self-diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And it seems now that the professionals in such a clinic could not contradict them. They would have to validate this self-diagnosis. That's my issue. In your presentation, you said that it is important not to criminalize non-affirming psychological therapy, because now what will be prohibited is somebody who is forced or somebody who is a minor going through these therapies. But you would like young people to have access to therapy, but not necessarily just affirming therapies. Is that correct? No, I'm sorry. No, what we're saying is by non-affirming psychotherapy, we're saying that therapists should not necessarily affirm these self-diagnoses, because we don't want to have these young people going through biomedicalized interventions, including hormones and surgeries. We are afraid that anything that is not affirming the gender dysphoria might be labeled conversion therapy. And that's our problem with this legislation. But as Mr. Ashcroft has said, the types of conversion therapy he underwent is absolutely something we're opposed to. Because if somebody really does have gender dysphoria, then that is something that should be treated. But some of these young people really don't. So you would like people to have access to psychotherapy. And you would, if I'm clear, you would even go as far as saying psychotherapy could influence their orientation or gender identity, but could go against what the person is thinking? Well, what we would like to see is that parents and children should have a chance to choose psychotherapy that affirms what the young person feel. We don't want biomedicalized interventions. We don't want a young person to be steered in that direction automatically and therefore steered automatically to a validation of what they have self-diagnosed, because half of children have a comorbidity. They have a mental health disorder. And certainly Dr. Cantor could validate those figures that I gave. We want to make sure that these young people's self-identification is not necessarily validated. It is important to study what the causes are of the young person's distress. Thank you.
And then we'll go to Mr. Garrison for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. I want to extend a particular thanks to Mr. Ashcroft for his kind words at the beginning. And I just want to say to him that one of the privileges of being a member of Parliament is we often get to meet individuals like himself who are incredibly brave and incredibly dedicated to telling their story in order to make the world a better place for others. So I thank him for his advocacy and for being here today, and I know it's not easy. I really think the committee needs to give a bit more time today to the voice of survivors. So I'd like to ask Mr. Ashcroft, who I know works with a survivors group, to maybe talk about that group and what that group has found in terms of what survivors really need.
Thank you so much for your question. I greatly appreciate it. That was actually in my speech. So essentially, we have founded ctsurvivors.org. And ctsurvivors.org is an organization where conversion therapy survivors meet all across Canada and the United States. We are partnered with Brave Network Melbourne because they're doing the same thing as well. So essentially what we are looking for is survivor supports, further research, have a healing space where we can celebrate friendships, and mental health. We have some clinicians that are on the board with us as well as we do have a legal team that helps survivors as well. Thank you.
And can you tell us a bit more about the common challenges that you find that survivors are facing as a result of conversion therapy?
Survivors have a tough time with relationships and relational issues. I'm thankful that I had weekly counseling early on, so that way that I can process what I have been through. A lot of survivors don't have the money and don't have the support. I think it's very important to realize that when we're working with the people that have experienced trauma, we have to consider that it will take time, and quite possibly they will never heal from that trauma. So we're working on creating a safe space for survivors, and we're looking for your support.
Thank you for that. I guess the final thing that I would ask you, the Voice of Survivors, is can you give us? I know you mentioned some figures, but give us again the sense of the number of people who are still being subjected to various forms of conversion therapy, because I think that there's a tendency for reasonable Canadians to say, "Gee, this surely must not be happening anymore."
Yeah, it is. So in short, there is a couple of allegations that were subjected to on Vice about conversion therapy practices that are happening in Kingston, Ontario. We have to amplify those voices because there are voices that aren't being heard as much, and it is still happening within the cracks.
Great, thanks. I want to now turn back to Dr. Wells and the question of consent, because I think he made a very important contribution here. When the minister has said he fears a charter challenge, do you think, Dr. Wells, that there is a substantive basis for fearing that charge would succeed when there are these legitimate questions about consent being possible?
No, I don't share the same concerns, nor the legal experts that I have consulted with, including those who've argued already before the Supreme Court of Canada on the LGBTQ issues. And quite simply, because of the clear research we've heard, time and time again from all of the major professional health and medical associations who've denounced any research or scientific support behind this notion of conversion therapy. What we do know is the harms and the dangers that it is. I think best described, I've seen conversion therapy as nothing more than a dangerous lie. It's an abusive, fraudulent, coercive practice. So this notion that one can give consent to something that doesn't work, the government restricts all kinds of adult behaviors. You can't drive your car without a seatbelt. That might be part of your freedom of expression, but we know that it's not only to protect the individual, but to protect others. So there is a compelling public health interest in extending this legislation to include all adults, much like Quebec has done in their legislation that they're debating right now, Bill 70, and many of the municipalities across Canada ensure that their legislation covers all ages.
Great. Do I have additional time, Madam Chair?
You have a minute left, sir.
Okay. I want to turn to Dr. Zucker and his concern about this question of what exploration means. And I wonder, I have heard this from many people, if we replaced exploration with something a bit more specific, language along the lines that said that what's allowed is the exploration and development of an integrated personal identity without favoring any particular sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Is this the kind of thing that Dr. Zucker's looking for in terms of being more specific in that section of the bill?
It's a little better, but it's still inadequate. I think that if politicians want to take this legislation seriously in terms of how it would work for clinical practitioners, what you need to do is put this part of the legislation on pause and convene a panel of experts in the area of gender dysphoria, where they can come up with a proposed consensus guideline as to what exactly constitutes exploration. Failing that, the ambiguity will create a lot of anxiety.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. Your time is up, and it looks like that is all the time that we will have today with our witnesses. I'd like to, on behalf of the committee, thank the witnesses for appearing today and for your very compelling testimony. And I look forward to any written submissions that you have provided or may be providing going forward. But thank you all very much. The meeting is now adjourned.